scene, we have a young lady's head smashed in.
A woman found dead.
The trauma she endured must have been unimaginable.
When 3 potential suspects are identified, the finger pointing begins.
Do you know why we want to talk to you? No, I didn't want any part of it.
Did not know anything else. I swear to God, this sounds like something out of a movie.
But first, a serial killer on the loose for 16 years.
This individual is going to strike again.
Until detectives catch a break.
We kick into panic mode because that's our one shot to interview.
Investigators searching for answers.
How many have you killed? I want him to know that I already know the answer.
In the interrogation room.
He grabbed his soul and, broke it open.
Santa Fe Street near the railroad tracks in East Dallas. We find a strangled Hispanic female there who's had her clothes torn off of her. They swabbed her. And all of the swabs tested positive for the presence of seminal fluids. They were able to collect a suspect DNA. When you look at something like that, you're thinking that this girl has been killed because of a sexual assault.
Her mother came forward and identified the victim as her daughter, Maria Perales. We started to learn a little bit about her, that she was very outgoing, she was adventurous, friendly. They also added she had been working at a nightclub as a waitress, as a mesera. Here in Dallas, there are a lot of clubs that are referred to as taxi dancer clubs, as a mesera. Their job is to keep the clientele in the bar, sitting down and having drinks with them and dance with them. What we initially found out was that she had left with a Latin male in his 20s.
Medium height and medium weight. It's super vague. And narrows it down in Dallas, Texas to about, 400,000 people. The call was on a dead body that was found at a construction site.
She was hidden behind mounds of dirt that were there. She also was left partially nude.
She was wearing her high-heel shoes still, I can recall that. Her back was exposed to the sun, and it had actually burned some of her skin. She'd had her clothes pulled off, and then it had been used as a ligature to strangle her.
This individual was identified as Olivia Hernandez. She was 23 years old at the time.
She loved her children, her 2 daughters. She would do anything for them. She was a waitress working at those clubs, and that was why she was working, because of them. She wanted to have a better life for them.
You've got 2 women, they're both unclothed, they're about the same age, their appearances are relatively similar. We're immediately suspicious, okay, this could be linked.
The profile that I was building in my mind was that we had a serial killer on our hands.
To me, it's a waiting thing. We've requested the DNA comparison, and it's only a matter of time before it comes back in. After the DNA results come in, and that confirmed it. This is the same killer.
Six months passed, a year passed, And this individual did not strike. Was he gonna hit again? I felt that he would. And it was just a matter of time.
The victim was found at a garage. She's displayed on the hood of a car after having been brutalized by someone. She's completely naked. The victim's name was Veronica Hernandez. Again, she worked as a taxi dancer.
There it was. We realized that he was still out there. We were looking at the same individual. There's no doubt in our mind.
Yo tenía 11 años cuando pasó lo de mi mamá. Mucho nos dolió. Ese fue el peor día de mi vida. Era la mejor madre. Y una mujer muy trabajadora que sabía sacar adelante a sus hijos.
What I miss from my mother is feeling that touch, that she's next to you or around you or showing you that love and affection. I think that's what I miss.
The media made it run like wildfire, and an anonymous caller called in a tip that this particular suspect that he had seen with this third victim was actually wearing a mechanic shirt. And on the shirt, he had his name, Jose. And sure enough, there was an individual in that shop named Jose where the body was found. And that's how we ended up with Jose Cifuentes on our radar. Once Solis came to the homicide unit, and it was my responsibility to take him under my wing. I also learned that Detective Solis spoke fluent Spanish.
Jose Cifuentes, he was a 21-year-old. I think I was 26, maybe 25. I mean, we were not far off. He said he was from Mexico. I'm like, hey, I was born in Mexico. It kind of breaks the tension. And there's something that connects us. He told me this sob story that, man, I wouldn't hurt a fly, I would never kill a chicken. He would say, I don't know Veronica. And I say, well, you know, people are saying that they saw you with her. I was just saying, hey, tell me what happened. It was that cat and mouse, game, see how much you know. And I said, you know what, I know you took her. He finally told me that he took her to that shop. He said, she fought. And he said, I silenced her. I went and told the lead detective, hey, this guy just confessed.
The results came back, and there had been a positive match done and connected between Cifuentes, Perales, Olivia Hernandez, and Veronica Hernandez.
We want to bring him in and see if he'll talk to us about the 2 prior murders.
The problem was that after Cifuentes had been jailed, he turned around and made bond.
At that time, the bond was set at $100,000. To me, it's kind of low. All you have to do is post 10%. So his sister posted the bond.
I inappropriately assumed I had the luxury of time. So we go back to an investigative mode and we're looking for the guy. His sister tells us he's fled back to Mexico. Spent a lot of time looking for him, but not finding him.
Three dead women, all strangled. I don't care if they were living in Dallas, Texas, another state, another country. That's a serial killer who's free. And so, the urgency to, locate, identify, and ultimately remove the danger from the world, it's high.
And then here, years later, homicide detectives think they have found this guy, Jose Cifuentes, on Facebook. He created a Facebook page. It seemed implausible, but it was the truth.
FBI and Interpol and the folks down in Mexico City put together a surveillance team. He was arrested on, never forget it, April 25th, 2019.
It's been 2 decades, and if we can put a familiar person in front of him, he's more likely to divulge information.
You're going to have to see.
He's being escorted by our SWAT team. The first thing I say, hey, take all the handcuffs. And I told him. And I wanted him to hear that. Take the handcuffs off. And right there, I'm trying to establish that I don't feel threatened by him.
We're excited, but, kind of kick into panic mode, because that's our one shot to interview. And someone who's killed and killed repeatedly does not come in and confess all their sins. So I needed that to happen.
José. Sí. ¿Cómo estás? Bien. ¿Te acuerdas de mí? Sí.
You have to gain their trust. And one of the best ways is see if you can give him something. And I gave him the picture of his wife.
¿Traigo una foto?
It usually builds rapport.
¿Cómo consiguió esta foto, Lee?
Leak. That is the short term for licenciado in Spanish. A licenciado, it's somebody with a title. So it was like, I respect you.
Okay, gracias, Lee.
The reaction to the photo of his wife was instant. It was like, from the minute he walked into the room, Juan Salas, he reached into Cifuentes and just grabbed his soul and, broke it open.
Fuiste a Monterrey, Monterrey es grande.
Ajá, sí.
¿A qué área?
A San Nicolás de los Garza.
¿Y ahí qué hacías?
Ahí vivía y trabajaba en un taller.
¿Y luego después qué hiciste?
Y luego, pues, ahí cometimos un delito y ahí me encerraron en el penal del Topo como 8 años.
Me imagino que fue unos 8 años bien largos.
Fíjese, nomás un custodio me miraba, me dijo, no, él me dijo, yo sé alguien que te puede ayudar, y yo dije, ¿quién? Un abogado. Dijo, no, Dios, pídele. Y
¿ahí fue donde comenzaste a ir a la iglesia?
Ajá, antes cuando salí de Apodaca, en el 2014 ya traía ya hablaba yo con Dios y todo.
Creo que como creyente nomás hay uno que puede juzgar.
Dios.
I am a religious person. I believe in God. And so we're speaking the same language. And that was the key, trying to get him to tell me more about himself, to open up more. José, si yo te preguntara, ¿cuánta gente has matado?
Pues que le diré.
No hay nada encubierto delante de Dios.
Sí, sí hay. Ahora he comprendido que el que encubre sus pecados no prospera, Lee.
Eso está en la Biblia. Me acabas de dar decir. ¿Cuánta gente has matado, José? Y yo creo que esta es una oportunidad de uno reflexionar y ponerse bien con Dios. Y ser honesto, porque yo creo que eso suelta el alma.
Me libera todo, Lee.
Y el Señor dice que confesado vuestros pecados con ella.
Ay, me siento bien mal, Lee.
He's at the tipping point whether should I tell him or not. If I just push him a little bit more, he might just tell me the number. Or say, I want a lawyer. And at that moment, you lost your chance. You can feel the truth. You can almost probably touch it. And I am trying to convince him that, go ahead and tell me.
Está mal, Lee.
Tú sí sabes cuántas has matado. También es verdad. Tú sí sabes. ¿Cuántos? It wasn't a question, it was more an affirmation. How many have you killed? I want him to know that I already know the answer. Pero yo quiero hablar del 98.
Ah, sí, una chava de la...
¿Qué pasó?
No, pues esa salió de un bar y la seguí.
Ok.
¿Verdad? Y ya, pues, le pedí que tuviéramos relaciones y pues sí dijo que sí, ¿verdad?
Ah, ok. ¿Tuviste ahí relaciones?
Ajá.
¿Y qué pasó?
Ya después como que... pues yo le dije que le iba a pagar y le dio coraje que no, ¿verdad?
Ok.
Entonces empezamos a discutirle, ¿verdad? La agarré de aquí del cuello, ¿verdad?
Ok.
Y pues la apreté, ¿verdad? Hasta que se asfixió. Y ya después como que pasó eso, me asusté, pues agarré el carro y me...
So, tú más o menos en tu mente sí sabías que estaba muerto.
Sí, sabía.
I remember the day, I'm getting goosebumps right now thinking about it. You work on something that long, and to have it culminate in that way is a tremendous feeling of accomplishment.
Okay. Después de esta, ¿pasó otra vez?
Ajá, otra vez. Era de mesera.
¿Y qué pasó esa noche?
Igual y pues hice lo mismo que con ella, ¿verdad? El coraje.
He confessed to it. This is how he did it. But I'm trying to find a motive. ¿Por qué te daba coraje? ¿O qué pasó? Porque tienes relaciones con ellas. Ayúdame a entender. Quiero saber qué está pensando José. ¿Qué siente?
Como odio hacia ella.
Yo quiero entender por qué tenías ese coraje contra ellas.
Mi madre hasta de chavo pues nos trataba muy mal.
Okay.
De hecho nos golpeaba y todo ese... Y ahora lo entiendo, ¿verdad? Y pues sí me arrepiento, o sea, es como usted dice, le agradezco que Dios me lo haya puesto otra vez en mi camino. y hablar con la verdad porque...
No, aquí estamos hablando la verdad.
Sí, me arrepiento por todo lo que he hecho. Le pido perdón a Dios. Sí.
Jose Cifuentes, he killed 3 people, and he confessed to it. That's the icing on the cake, because I knew that he was facing minimum 3 life sentences. He's not coming out.
I do not believe he would have confessed to anybody else. There was just such a deep spiritual connection between these 2 men, and we got exactly what we needed. Veronica Hernandez's daughter gets on the stand and looks at him, and her eyes kind of explode. And she points at him and she says, "I remember you. You were at my mother's funeral."
He estado ahí, en las últimas bancas del funeral. O sea, algo que te quita tu mamá, todo el tiempo vas a tenerlo ahí. Eso nunca se te borra de la mente.
When you're a homicide detective, you don't get to choose your victims. Your suspect does that for you. I'm going to see to it that she matters, that we all matter. And good homicide detectives, you don't quit.
Sometimes, as a detective, you carry with you some of these cases because you weren't able to bring closure to them and bring peace and tranquility to the family. After 20 years, the justice was finally going to be served.
I miss her smile. I always think about how my life would be different with her. And I think it would be different. A good different.
Yes, I'm at South Fork Park, and we have a dead body on the road.
Do you see an obvious wound?
Yeah, it looks like her face has been smashed in. It looks definitely like somebody hurt her.
Stand back away from the body. I've got multiple officers on the way.
2 hikers at South Fork Park in the Acme Valley located a female deceased in the middle of the road. There was blood everywhere around her person. The trauma she endured during this event must have been unimaginable.
There was one set of tracks that basically led right over her. It looked like her head had been run over.
Between 11 o'clock the day before to 4 o'clock the morning of April 4th, there was 0 vehicles that came through there. Then around 6 a.m., we had 2 vehicles that came into the park. But we didn't really know what we had. Why was this victim here? Who is this person? We have a young lady's head smashed in. And we also noticed that she had 2 marks consistent with taser probes on her chest area. And the victim was missing her purse, so we couldn't identify her.
Darian was a firecracker. She came out ready for the world.
Didn't matter who you were, she'd worm her way into your heart. Loved kids, loved animals, and she loved her papa.
She was a very, very protective sister. She would always be wrapping her arms around her little brother. So I watched a very strong bond with them.
We battled like any other siblings would battle, but there was a lot of love in our relationship too. When she was in high school, she probably started going down the wrong path. My sister got sober, and I felt like I was finally building that relationship back with her.
She had been clean, and she was really trying to put her life together, and she was living with her grandparents. The night she died, her grandpa was still awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. Darian left and walked out to the end of the driveway, and then she was picked up. They don't know by who, and that's the last time that they saw or heard from Darian.
Not minutes later, the confidential informant informed us that she had spoken directly to a man named Brent Gerber, a drug dealer from Whatcom County. The whole reason they were going to that place was for a drug deal, to purchase methamphetamines.
We're going to have you sit over there.
We took a non-confrontational approach. He was real meek and mild and cooperative, and he wanted to talk to us.
We just want you to explain to us what actually happened, Brent.
These guys had me give them a ride to meet some people.
Okay, how do you know these guys?
They're staying in a motorhome at my buddy's house. Well, it's not my house. They live in a motorhome too.
That's where those two are staying?
Well, not two, just the one kid, the Peyton kid. That's why I agreed. I'm like, okay, I'd seen him there a few times. I'll give you a ride, whatever.
So what exactly did he tell you that he needed you to do when you drove him down?
Contact me.
To meet the girl. And then what did he say he was going to do to the girl?
Just jack her money.
Jack her money. Okay, got it. Okay. So and how did this other guy get involved?
They're buddies. You know, I didn't want any part of it besides I was a dumbass that drove him out there. But for $50, what the hell?
Yeah. So you guys drive down there, and then where did you drive?
We went to the park, and then I drove in, and this girl gets out and goes over and talks to dude. And then he's like, go. And I was like, what do you mean? Go! I said, okay. And then she jumped on the truck. And they were fighting or whatever, and I just kept going.
Okay, you went, and then was she still there?
She was like reaching for inside the truck for whatever he took from her. And they were trying to push her off. Were they pushing her? Yeah, he was pushing on her and like hitting her in the throat, and the dude in the back had a taser, and I'm like, dude, shut the thing off, because it's traumatizing to me. Did he do her? Did he touch her with the taser? I was trying to drive. I don't know if they hit her with it or not.
The theory that the medical examiner had was that she was hit by the passenger rear tire.
We were convinced that Brent was responsible at that point and knew full well that he'd driven over her.
So I just kept going, and, you know, I don't know. That's about basically how it went.
Brent gave the name Peyton, and I recalled a man named Peyton Mulryan from my time when I was in a local drug task force. We definitely were going to look for Peyton Mulryan and pick him up.
That's Peyton. I don't know what's gonna happen. Like, what? Am I in trouble for it? Like, what did I do?
Yeah, well, you're gonna be arrested.
Me? No way.
We know there's more to the story. That's the information we want.
This morning, homicide detectives say they've arrested the driver suspected of hitting and killing a woman in Whatcom County over the weekend. They are now working on finding a second man.
Just don't move so they tighten up.
So Darian's brother, Eli, told me that he was able to log into Darian's various accounts and Facebook account in particular. And he discovered a whole series of messages from the morning when Darian died.
I sat there and read through all those messages, and then I got down to Peyton Mulryan's. I read step by step every last thing my sister did before she got killed. I read the meetup, I read everything saying that he was in a car waiting right next to her at the park. I read it all. She met Peyton Mulryan over social media that year. I think Peyton knew that she was in a vulnerable state and she trusted him. So it wasn't like she was expecting to get robbed that night.
Based off all the information, we knew she was contacting Peyton to arrange a drug deal. And their intent was to rob Darian and that she would just go away minus $250, but she fought back and they killed her. So at that point, we still weren't 100% sure who the third suspect was in the back seat with the taser, but the investigation really pivoted towards trying to find Peyton Mulryan. While searching for Peyton and his location, some leads came in about him being at this particular gas station on Saturday morning. We found video surveillance of the white pickup, that there was 3 males in it. Based off tattoos and the physical description and comparing it to previous booking photos from our jail, we were able to positively identify him. The third suspect is Tyler O'Keefe.
Tyler was arrested on a traffic stop, and he agreed to give a statement.
Okay, I don't know if Detective Francis told you, but everything in this room is recorded visually and audibly. The camera's right there. All right.
Tyler has more of a stable home life. He has a girlfriend, he has a child, so we went in there with a little more leverage. We felt that he had more to lose.
Do you know why we want to talk to you?
I have a pretty good feeling about the whole Peyton Mulryan thing.
Peyton who?
Peyton Mulryan.
Yeah, we've got some information about how you were with Peyton. So tell us more about that.
How I was with him?
Yeah.
Well, in which?
We've got some still shots of you in the truck, the white truck with Peyton. Tell us about that.
Being with Peyton when?
Yeah.
I don't believe that I was.
Well, we believe that you were, because you're a pretty distinct-looking guy, and the photos speak for themselves. So.
In the white truck.
Yeah.
I mean,
So Tyler, we know what happened. Again, maybe if you want to start over, might be the best thing, buddy. Tyler, let's get something straight. We don't think you did anything like this purposely, okay? Not at all.
It was pretty clear that Tyler just needed something to give him a little assurance that we trusted him and we didn't think he was necessarily a bad guy.
I wanted nothing to do with that. But I was in the truck with them, yes. I was in the very back seat.
Yep.
But I was not an aggressor by any means. I saw it. The gal got out of the car. She went over to Peyton's window and they were talking, and I think that's when Peyton said go, and then the driver sped off, and the gal jumped onto the truck.
Jumped on the truck where?
So, like basically on the passenger side, and then at one point was like kind of in the center of the hood, center of the vehicle, and then it was like
So she's not on the running board. She's on the hood of the car.
Yeah, I swear to God, this sounds like something out of a movie. And then the dude slammed on the brakes, and then kept going.
So she's on the hood of the car. He slams on the brakes. What happened then, Tyler?
He kept going. He never stopped.
We keep hearing about this taser that's being used.
A taser being used?
Yeah.
No. A taser, I did have a taser, but I did not use it.
Because she does have two little taser marks right here.
Looks
like taser.
Yeah, no. The taser was only brought out, and all I did was in the air, and it scared.
To scare her?
To scare her, yeah.
Okay.
Today's date is 4/10/2020. So why do you think you're here, Peyton?
I already know why.
All right. So do you want to talk to us about that, or ask us questions, or just tell us what happened?
I mean, I guess I would say I set up a drug deal. The drug deal went bad. Did not know anything else after that because dude kept driving. But I was a passenger.
So you set up a drug deal with Darian?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you please not say your name? I'm so
Definitely.
No, that's okay. We won't.
What kind of quantity
An ounce
of,
of meth.
and how much was she gonna pay you?
$250.
Did at any time did the exchange of dope happen?
No. There was no dope.
Grab the money and
Yeah.
Why her? Was she an easy target just because of your guys' history, or why her? You set up the deal. She reached out to you, and you planned to rob her of her money, take her money. You knew you didn't have the dough. Why her?
Well, I don't know. I guess I was just going through it.
Through what?
Toke's dope sick. I had no money.
You were in a relationship with her at one point. To some degree. You cared about her to some degree, right?
Yeah, I still did. You know what I mean? I was just...
But you decided to rob her. Why her?
It was going to be whoever hit me up that day.
Oh, so you would have done... This would have happened with anybody that contacted you?
Yeah.
Okay.
that's all I have.
Prosecutor's office just felt that we would not have a successful outcome with a murder one trial, and there was a strong possibility that a jury would not have found them guilty. So ultimately, the pleas then settled on manslaughter, first degree. Peyton Mulryan received 13 years. Brent Gerber and Tyler O'Keefe both received 9 years. I don't believe the time was just on men that will be out before they're 40 years old.
Everybody blamed each other. Nobody took full responsibility for the death of Darian Sather.
I think Darian's free, and I believe that Darian's in a much better place. And she was our little sunshine, and although we may not have her here, we can carry out her name. So she was a light to this world, and it was just snuffed out a little bit sooner than we wanted.
The desert does not scream. It keeps secrets. Long after footprints disappear, long after the wind erases tire tracks, long after families stop believing that the phone will ring, the desert waits in absolute silence, guarding stories no one was ever meant to hear. Then one ordinary afternoon, the earth opened. On February 2nd, 2009, in the growing suburbs on the western edge of Albuquerque, New Mexico, a woman was walking her dog across a stretch of undeveloped land known as West Mesa. Construction crews had been preparing nearby property for new housing developments. The area looked empty, harsh, almost forgotten, a landscape of brittle brush, loose sand, an endless horizon beneath a cloudless sky. Her dog suddenly became interested in something protruding from the ground. At first glance, it looked like a weathered branch. It wasn't. It was a human bone. Within hours, police officers sealed off the area. Crime scene tape fluttered across the desert as investigators knelt beside the shallow depression. What they uncovered next transformed an ordinary afternoon into one of the largest homicide investigations in New Mexico history. Another bone, then another, then an entire skeleton. The excavation expanded. The count climbed. One body became 2. 2 became 5. 5 became 11. By the time investigators finished searching the mesa, they had recovered the remains of 11 women and 1 unborn child, buried in shallow graves only a few hundred feet apart. Someone had used this isolated patch of desert as a cemetery. Not for 1 murder. Not for 2. For years. The discovery stunned Albuquerque. Television helicopters circled overhead. Reporters filled the roadside. Families who had spent years searching for missing daughters suddenly rushed toward the police command post carrying photographs, hoping and fearing at the same time. Some already knew. Others refused to believe it. Every recovered skeleton represented years of unanswered questions. Every grave marked a life that had quietly disappeared while the rest of the city continued moving forward. And as detectives began identifying the victims, a terrifying pattern emerged. These women hadn't vanished together. They disappeared one by one. Across several years, often without making national headlines. Most had struggled with addiction. Many worked as sex workers. Several had unstable housing. Nearly all had slipped through the cracks of society long before they vanished. Their disappearances rarely dominated front pages. Few generated nationwide searches. Some families said they felt dismissed from the very beginning. One missing woman could be explained away. She left voluntarily. She'll come back. She's probably avoiding her family. She's using drugs. She's somewhere else. Then another disappeared. Then another. Then another. The explanations continued, until 12 graves erased every comfortable assumption. Investigators now faced an impossible question. Who had been hunting vulnerable women across Albuquerque for years without leaving enough evidence to stop him? Or perhaps even more disturbing, had this killer operated far beyond the city itself? Because almost immediately, veteran detectives noticed something deeply unsettling. This pattern wasn't unique. Across America's highways, truck stops, forgotten motels, industrial districts, and isolated frontage roads, women living on society's margins had been disappearing for decades. Some were later found murdered. Others were never found at all. Some investigators believed they were looking at dozens of unrelated predators. Others wondered whether America's highways allowed killers to move invisibly from city to city, crossing jurisdictions faster than investigators could connect the dots. The West Mesa graves reopened those fears. Not because investigators immediately believed every unsolved disappearance belonged to one murderer. They didn't. But because history had already shown how easily serial predators could exploit fragmented investigations. A missing woman reported in one county. Another body discovered 200 miles away. Different police departments. Different databases. Different detectives. Different assumptions. Meanwhile, the killers simply kept driving. West Mesa forced investigators to ask whether someone had spent years exploiting exactly those weaknesses. The landscape itself almost seemed designed for concealment. West Mesa overlooked Albuquerque from the city's western edge, where suburban neighborhoods slowly surrendered to open desert. During daylight, the terrain appeared almost peaceful, dry grass bending beneath constant wind, scattered shrubs clinging to sandy soil, distant mountains framing the horizon. At night, everything changed. Darkness swallowed landmarks. Roads disappeared. The silence became overwhelming. A person familiar with the area could enter unnoticed, leave unnoticed, and return again whenever necessary. Shallow graves required surprisingly little effort in the loose desert earth. The climate slowed decomposition in complicated ways. Animals scattered remains. Wind reshaped the ground. Time completed the cover-up. Years passed before construction, and chance exposed what nature had carefully hidden. As forensic specialists painstakingly documented every grave, they noticed important similarities. Most victims appeared buried individually rather than dumped together. The graves were relatively shallow. The burials occurred over multiple years. There was no evidence suggesting a single mass killing event. Instead, investigators saw patience, repetition, experience. Someone had returned to this location again and again, confident that nobody would discover what lay beneath the desert. Confidence like that rarely develops overnight. It grows through success, through repetition, through the terrifying realization that no one is watching. As the identification process continued, names slowly replaced case numbers. Each carried a separate tragedy. Each represented a family that had spent birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries wondering what happened. One mother remembered the last hug. Another sister remembered the final phone call. Friends remembered promises to return later that evening. Some disappearances stretched back years before the graves were discovered. Hope had slowly faded into uncertainty. Now uncertainty became unbearable certainty. But identifying victims solved only one part of the mystery. Finding the killer proved infinitely harder. Bones reveal only so much. Soft tissue had vanished long before discovery. Potential DNA evidence had deteriorated. Weather erased countless traces. Any tire impressions disappeared years earlier. Footprints no longer existed. Fibers, fingerprints, biological material. Most opportunities had vanished with time. The crime scene had remained untouched not because the killer protected it perfectly. Because nature did. Detectives suddenly found themselves investigating murders committed years in the past using evidence that had aged alongside the victims. Every passing season before discovery had quietly strengthened the killer's advantage. Investigators interviewed families, former friends, neighbors, social workers, police officers who originally handled missing person reports. They reconstructed timelines from fading memories and incomplete records. Where had each woman last been seen? Who had they spoken with? What neighborhoods did they frequent? Who knew them? Who feared them? Patterns slowly emerged. Many victims lived difficult lives. Several battled addiction. Many engaged in street-level sex work. Some disappeared after being seen along Central Avenue, one of Albuquerque's busiest corridors, where motels, bars, convenience stores, and heavy traffic created endless opportunities for anonymous encounters. Predators understand geography. They understand vulnerability. They understand routine. Someone offering money. Someone offering transportation. Someone appearing ordinary. A short ride. A quick transaction. Then silence. The same streets that provided opportunity also provided camouflage. Cars arrived. Cars departed. Faces blurred together. License plates went unnoticed. People working long nights often focused on immediate survival rather than memorizing strangers. If a dangerous man appeared polite, calm, and familiar enough, suspicion faded. Until it was too late. As investigators examined each victim's last known movements, another difficult reality became impossible to ignore. Many disappearances had initially received limited investigative urgency. Resources were finite. Leads dried up quickly. Witnesses disappeared. Some victims had outstanding warrants. Others moved frequently. Several lacked stable communication with relatives. When contact stopped, days, or even weeks, sometimes passed before someone officially reported them missing. Those delays mattered enormously. The first 48 hours often determine whether investigators preserve surveillance footage, locate witnesses, recover physical evidence, or identify suspect vehicles. Years later, nearly all those opportunities had evaporated. Families expressed frustration that echoed across countless cold cases involving marginalized victims. Some believed investigators had assumed their daughters simply chose to disappear. Others said missing person reports felt routine rather than urgent. Police officials acknowledged the challenges but emphasized that every disappearance presented unique circumstances. Whether mistakes had been made remained a painful point of debate. What could not be debated was the outcome. 12 victims waited beneath the desert for years. By then, the damage could never be fully reversed. The media soon adopted a haunting name: the West Mesa Bone Collector. The phrase spread rapidly across newspapers, television broadcasts, and online forums. It sounded almost mythical, almost fictional. Yet nothing about the investigation resembled fiction. Every recovered bone represented forensic reality. Every family interview carried authentic grief. Every unanswered question reflected a genuine investigative failure shared across multiple years. As national attention intensified, comparisons inevitably surfaced. Reporters referenced other notorious serial murder investigations involving vulnerable women. Experts discussed historical cases where victims living on society's margins remained overlooked until body counts became impossible to ignore. Those comparisons generated headlines. They also created problems. Detectives cautioned against assuming identical offenders or identical methods. The evidence simply did not support sweeping conclusions. Still, experienced investigators privately understood why people kept drawing those connections. Serial predators often search for the same vulnerabilities: isolation, poverty, addiction, limited police attention, minimal public visibility. The circumstances differ. The underlying opportunity remains tragically familiar. Meanwhile, forensic laboratories work methodically through every fragment recovered from West Mesa. Anthropologists estimated ages, examined trauma where possible, compared dental records, collected DNA, cross-referenced missing person databases. Every scientific breakthrough answered one question while creating 3 new ones. How were they killed? Why these women? Why this location? And perhaps most frightening of all, why did the murders stop? Had the killer died? Been imprisoned for another crime? Moved somewhere else? Or was he still alive, quietly watching the investigation unfold on television, knowing that years had already erased the evidence investigators needed most? No detective could answer. Not then. Not now. Because somewhere between the last confirmed disappearance and the afternoon a dog stopped beside an exposed bone, an invisible chapter unfolded across the New Mexico desert. A chapter without eyewitnesses, without surveillance cameras, without confessions, only silence, only sand, only graves waiting patiently beneath a landscape that revealed nothing until chance finally forced it to speak. Before investigators could identify a killer, they first had to understand the women whose lives had ended beneath the desert. Every name pulled from the missing person files represented more than a case number. Each belonged to someone who had once laughed, argued with family, made plans for tomorrow, and believed there would be another sunrise. Yet as detectives reconstructed their final months, a painful pattern emerged, one that exposed not only the work of a possible serial predator, but also the invisible lives of people society too often overlooked. The women recovered from West Mesa had disappeared over a span of several years, generally between 2001 and 2005. Their ages varied, but many were in their 20s or early 30s. Several had struggled with substance addiction, some engaged in street-level sex work. Others drifted between temporary homes, motels, friends' apartments, and shelters. Those realities complicated their daily lives, but they did not define them. To the people who loved them, they were daughters, mothers, sisters, cousins, and friends whose disappearances left permanent wounds. One family remembered endless evenings spent driving through Albuquerque, searching every neighborhood where their daughter had once been seen. Another recalled hanging homemade missing person flyers on telephone poles, hoping someone might recognize a familiar smile. Rain destroyed the paper. Wind tore them away. Weeks became months. Months became years. Hope slowly transformed into endurance. The investigation forced detectives to revisit every disappearance from the beginning, this time looking not at isolated cases, but at a possible chain of connected events. They spread maps across conference tables, marking the locations where each woman had last been seen. Red circles began clustering around familiar streets. Central Avenue appeared repeatedly. So did areas known for heavy traffic, inexpensive motels, convenience stores open through the night, and intersections where vulnerable women often met strangers. The emerging picture suggested opportunity rather than coincidence. Someone may have known exactly where to look. That possibility raised uncomfortable questions about the offender's familiarity with Albuquerque. Was he a local resident who understood every shortcut, every vacant lot, every isolated road? Did he work nights, allowing him to move unnoticed while much of the city slept? Or was he someone constantly traveling through New Mexico, blending into the endless stream of vehicles crossing the interstate highways every day? No answer came easily. Investigators knew only that whoever buried the victims possessed remarkable confidence. Returning repeatedly to the same burial area carried extraordinary risk. Every trip into the desert created another opportunity to be seen. Another chance for a passing vehicle. Another possibility that construction workers or recreational visitors might unexpectedly appear. Yet the burials continued. Again. And again. Confidence usually comes from experience. Either the killer believed the location would never be discovered, or previous visits had convinced him that no one was paying attention. That realization shifted attention toward the burial site itself. West Mesa was not simply empty land. It sat near expanding residential developments and roadways that connected different parts of Albuquerque. During daylight, construction equipment occasionally operated nearby. Utility workers entered the area. Off-road vehicles sometimes crossed the terrain. At night, however, the landscape became overwhelmingly dark. A person familiar with the dirt roads could reach secluded sections without attracting much attention. Detectives wondered whether the burial site had been chosen years before the first victim disappeared. Perhaps the offender had worked nearby. Perhaps he hunted in the area. Perhaps he simply discovered an isolated stretch of desert where shallow graves remained hidden by wind and time. Every possibility remained speculative. Investigators carefully avoided presenting assumptions as facts, knowing that one incorrect theory could send an already difficult investigation in the wrong direction. Forensic anthropologists continued examining the remains with painstaking precision. Although decomposition had severely limited the available evidence, scientists documented every observable detail. Bone injuries, dental work, healed fractures, previous medical procedures. Anything capable of identifying victims or revealing possible trauma received careful attention. But years beneath the desert had taken their toll. Unlike fresh homicide scenes where investigators might recover fingerprints, fibers, DNA, or detailed injury patterns, West Mesa presented only fragments of a much larger story. The victims could still speak through science, but their voices had grown faint. One question haunted investigators from the beginning: how had the women died? Publicly available forensic findings have never provided definitive answers for every victim. The condition of the remains made determining exact causes of death extraordinarily difficult. Detectives could conclude these were homicide victims based on the circumstances of their burials and investigative findings, but reconstructing the precise sequence of each murder remained far more complicated. That uncertainty deprived investigators of one of their most valuable tools. The method of killing often reveals offender behavior. It can indicate planning, emotion, control, experience. Without that information, behavioral profiling became significantly more difficult. Still, experienced investigators searched for patterns elsewhere. Victim selection, geographic movement, burial technique, timing. Every serial offender leaves habits, even when physical evidence disappears. The challenge lies in recognizing those habits before assumptions replace facts. As detectives interviewed surviving relatives, another recurring detail surfaced. Several victims vanished after ordinary days. No dramatic confrontation. No reported threats. No obvious warning. Someone simply saw them alive. Then no one ever saw them again. Those disappearances reflected a chilling efficiency. If a predator operated repeatedly over several years, he likely understood how to gain trust quickly. Street-level encounters often unfolded within minutes. A driver stopped. A conversation followed. Money changed hands. The vehicle disappeared into traffic. Witnesses rarely remembered faces. Cars blended together. Darkness concealed details. The city itself became an accomplice. Thousands of vehicles traveled Albuquerque every night. Most carried ordinary people returning home from work. One may have carried a killer. The investigation expanded beyond Albuquerque as law enforcement agencies compared unsolved disappearances across New Mexico and neighboring states. Detectives examined whether similar victim profiles had emerged elsewhere. Could women who vanished hundreds of miles apart somehow share the same offender? The question naturally invited comparisons to the long-discussed concept of an interstate serial killer, a predator capable of exploiting America's vast highway system to avoid detection. For decades, criminologists have debated how often serial offenders travel across jurisdictions. Some certainly have. Others committed every known offense within relatively small geographic areas. There is no universal pattern. The West Mesa investigation never established that the perpetrator traveled across multiple states. However, the similarities between this case and other unsolved disappearances prompted investigators to remain open to broader possibilities rather than limiting their search to Albuquerque alone. Interstate highways changed criminal investigations long before modern surveillance technology existed. A person could leave one city before dawn, cross state lines by afternoon, disappear into another community before sunset. Separate police departments often maintained separate investigative priorities. Communication improved dramatically over time, especially with national databases, but gaps still existed during the years many West Mesa victims disappeared. Those gaps fascinated criminal profilers. Not because they proved one nationwide killer existed, because they demonstrated how vulnerable investigations could become when crimes crossed invisible administrative boundaries. While detectives explored broader connections, another development intensified public interest. News organizations began examining earlier missing person investigations involving Albuquerque women. Families spoke openly about their frustrations. Some questioned whether more aggressive investigations years earlier might have prevented additional deaths. Police officials defended many of the original investigative decisions, emphasizing the limited information available at the time. Missing adults often leave voluntarily. Substance abuse complicates timelines. Witnesses sometimes provide contradictory information. Detectives must balance available resources across hundreds of active investigations. Both perspectives reflected painful realities. Families wanted urgency. Investigators needed evidence. The distance between those two realities can become enormous when answers never arrive. Meanwhile, behavioral analysts considered what little offender psychology could reasonably be inferred. The repeated use of one burial area suggested organization. The graves indicated at least some planning after death. Selecting vulnerable victims reduced immediate risk of resistance and delayed discovery. The absence of obvious attempts to publicly communicate with investigators separated this offender from notorious killers who sought media attention. There were no verified letters, no authenticated phone calls, no confirmed taunting messages. The silence itself became part of the mystery. Some serial offenders crave recognition. Others seek complete invisibility. If the West Mesa offender belonged to the second category, he had achieved precisely that. Years passed before anyone realized a cemetery existed. Investigators also considered whether more than one offender could have been responsible. Could multiple killers independently use similar victim populations? Could unrelated murders eventually converge inside one burial ground? Publicly available evidence has never established such a conclusion, and investigators generally approach the site as a potentially connected homicide series while remaining cautious about drawing absolute conclusions. Complex investigations often resist simple explanations. Reality rarely follows the structure of fiction. As forensic work continued, detectives searched vehicles connected to persons of interest, reviewed employment histories, examined known violent offenders living in the Albuquerque area during the relevant years, and compared timelines wherever possible. One name after another entered investigative files. Most eventually left. Evidence proved insufficient. Alibis survived scrutiny. DNA failed to connect. Witness statements collapsed under closer examination. The suspect list changed repeatedly. The answers did not. Public pressure intensified. Community meetings filled with grieving relatives, journalists, neighborhood residents, and advocacy organizations demanding progress. Every press conference generated new speculation. Every rumor spread rapidly across internet forums. Some theories grew increasingly elaborate. Secret trafficking organizations, corrupt officials, traveling truck drivers, multiple serial killers operating simultaneously. Most lacked supporting evidence. Investigators repeatedly reminded the public that speculation, however compelling, could easily divert attention from verifiable facts. Facts remained stubbornly few. 12 sets of remains. Disappearances spanning several years. One burial ground. No identified offender. No murder weapon. No definitive eyewitness placing a suspect at the graves. No confession. No forensic breakthrough capable of ending the uncertainty. The deeper detectives looked, the more the case resembled a puzzle missing its center. Every surrounding piece fit somewhere. The most important piece remained absent. Night after night, investigators returned to maps covered in colored pins and handwritten notes. They replayed witness interviews. They enlarged aerial photographs. They reconstructed routes between Central Avenue and West Mesa, timing possible drives under different traffic conditions. The numbers were unsettling. A determined offender could leave a busy commercial corridor and reach the isolated desert in remarkably little time. The city faded quickly behind him. Streetlights disappeared. The open land swallowed everything else. Somewhere between those ordinary roads and those silent graves, 12 lives vanished into history. And somewhere beyond the reach of every search warrant, every laboratory examination, and every late-night strategy meeting, the person responsible remained unseen, leaving investigators to wonder whether the greatest clue in the entire case had been hiding in plain sight all along. As investigators reconstructed the lives of the victims, they began searching for something equally important: the routines of the man who may have been watching them. Serial offenders rarely choose victims at random. They choose opportunities, patterns, predictability. They learn where vulnerable people gather, when police patrols become less frequent, which neighborhoods empty after midnight, and which roads allow a quick escape. Every repeated success reinforces confidence. Every crime completed without detection becomes another lesson. The question facing detectives was no longer simply who committed the murders. It was how someone could repeatedly abduct women from one of New Mexico's largest cities without leaving behind enough evidence to identify him. The answer, investigators believed, almost certainly lay somewhere in the ordinary details of daily life. Albuquerque in the early 2000s was a growing city stretched across the Rio Grande Valley. Interstate 25 ran north and south through its center. Interstate 40 crossed east and west, linking California to the Great Plains and beyond. Every day, Thousands of vehicles entered and exited the city. Commercial trucks, tourists, commuters, construction workers, delivery drivers, and travelers blended into an endless stream of traffic. To most residents, the highways represented movement. To a predator, they could represent anonymity. That possibility did not prove the offender traveled across state lines. Publicly available evidence has never established that conclusion. But detectives understood how easily busy transportation corridors could help someone disappear after committing a crime. One exit. One turn. A few miles into darkness. Then nothing. Investigators turned their attention to the victim's final known movements. The timelines were frustratingly incomplete. Several women were last seen alive along Central Avenue, the historic corridor that cuts through Albuquerque from east to west. By day, it carried commuters, buses, and shoppers. By night, parts of the avenue became gathering places for individuals living on society's margins, people struggling with addiction, homelessness, or economic desperation. The environment created constant interaction between strangers. A vehicle slowed to the curb. A brief conversation. Someone got inside. Minutes later, both disappeared into traffic. Most of those encounters ended without violence. One of them may not have. Detectives reviewed every available witness statement from the years before the remains were discovered. They searched for recurring descriptions of suspicious vehicles, unusual customers, or men who appeared repeatedly in the same areas. The information was inconsistent. One witness remembered a light-colored pickup. Another described a dark sedan. Someone else recalled an older model station wagon. Years had passed. Memories faded. Colors changed. Details blurred together. Human memory is remarkably fragile, especially when recalling ordinary moments that seemed insignificant at the time. Nobody witnessing a routine roadside conversation imagines they are watching the final minutes of someone's life. Investigators also explored whether the victims knew one another. Several had crossed paths through overlapping social circles. Some frequented similar neighborhoods. Others were familiar with the same motels or support services. Those connections, however, reflected shared circumstances rather than clear evidence of a common offender. Detectives resisted forcing relationships where none could be confirmed. Speculation had already begun spreading beyond the investigation itself. Local media covered every development with intense interest. National outlets soon followed. Internet forums exploded with theories, each claiming to identify the mysterious killer. Some focused on convicted murderers already serving prison sentences. Others accused local businessmen, construction workers, long-haul truck drivers, former military personnel. None of those accusations, standing alone, constituted evidence. Investigators repeatedly warned that naming individuals without factual support could harm innocent people while distracting from legitimate investigative work. Yet public fascination only intensified. The discovery of 12 victims buried together naturally encouraged comparisons to other notorious serial homicide investigations. Some observers wondered whether Albuquerque had unknowingly harbored one of America's most prolific unidentified serial killers. Others questioned whether the West Mesa graves represented only a fraction of the total number of victims. That possibility deeply concerned law enforcement. If the offender had operated successfully for several years before the graves were discovered, investigators had to consider whether additional victims might exist elsewhere. Search teams examined other isolated areas around Albuquerque. Ground searches expanded. Tips poured in from across New Mexico. Human remains discovered in unrelated locations required careful comparison. Most ultimately proved unrelated. But every new discovery demanded attention. Every unidentified victim forced investigators to ask the same question once again. Could this be connected? The sheer volume of missing person cases complicated matters further. Hundreds of individuals disappear across the United States every year under vastly different circumstances. Some leave voluntarily, some die accidentally, others become victims of violence. Separating coincidence from meaningful patterns is among the greatest challenges investigators face. Serial homicide investigations often produce what detectives call noise. Thousands of tips, thousands of rumors, thousands of possibilities. Only a handful lead anywhere. The West Mesa investigation generated exactly that problem. Phone lines filled with callers claiming psychic visions. Anonymous accusations. Rumors overheard decades earlier. Stories that changed with every retelling. Detectives documented each lead. Most ended exactly where they began. Nowhere. Meanwhile, forensic specialists continued extracting information from the burial site itself. Although decomposition limited many conclusions, the arrangement of the graves offered subtle clues. The victims had not been placed randomly, nor had they been buried in a single excavation. Instead, investigators concluded that the graves appeared to have been created during separate visits over time. This suggested repeated access to the same location. Repeated confidence. Repeated success. Behavioral analysts viewed that consistency as significant. Returning to one burial ground carries risk. The offender must believe the location remains secure. He must remember how to reach it. He must remain calm enough to revisit a place already connected to previous crimes. Such behavior can indicate familiarity with the terrain. It can also reflect ritual, not necessarily in a psychological sense, but in practical habit. People repeat methods that work, especially when those methods appear invisible. One question lingered over every strategy meeting. Why West Mesa? The burial site was isolated enough to reduce accidental discovery, yet close enough to major roads for convenient access. Construction activity had not yet transformed the surrounding landscape during the years many victims disappeared. The area remained largely undeveloped. A person arriving after dark might encounter no one. Investigators wondered whether the killer had first discovered the location through work. Utility maintenance. Construction. Surveying. Hunting. Off-road recreation. No publicly confirmed evidence established any of those possibilities. But detectives understood that burial locations rarely emerge by accident. They are chosen. The choice itself often reveals something about the offender's familiarity with the environment. As months passed, investigators expanded background reviews of known violent offenders with ties to Albuquerque during the relevant years. They compared prison records, employment histories, addresses, vehicle registrations, known associates, probation files. Where timelines overlapped with victim disappearances, additional scrutiny followed. Several individuals attracted investigative interest. None could be conclusively linked through publicly disclosed evidence. The absence of physical evidence repeatedly undermined promising theories. No DNA. No fingerprints connecting suspect to victim. No verified eyewitness identifying the offender during an abduction. Without those anchors, even compelling circumstantial possibilities remained exactly that. Possibilities. The investigation also highlighted broader issues surrounding crimes against marginalized communities. Advocates argued that disappearances involving women engaged in sex work or struggling with addiction often received less public attention than other missing person cases. Law enforcement agencies acknowledged the challenges involved while emphasizing that every homicide victim deserves justice regardless of background. The conversation extended far beyond Albuquerque. Across North America, cold case investigators began revisiting older disappearances with renewed urgency, asking whether overlooked victims shared characteristics that warranted fresh examination. West Mesa became more than a local investigation. It became a reminder. Not every serial offender targets prominent citizens. Some deliberately seek those least likely to generate immediate public alarm. That strategy can buy time. Weeks. Months. Sometimes years. Exactly how much time remained one of the most unsettling questions surrounding the case. If the final known disappearances occurred around 2005, why were no additional confirmed victims linked to the burial ground afterward? Investigators considered multiple explanations. Perhaps the offender died. Perhaps he relocated. Perhaps he was imprisoned for an unrelated offense. Perhaps changing police activity altered his opportunities. Or perhaps investigators had not yet recognized later victims. No publicly available evidence has resolved that question. Behavioral experts caution against assuming that serial offenders always continue killing indefinitely. Some stop because circumstances change. Others lose opportunity. Some become incarcerated for unrelated crimes before investigators ever connect them to earlier murders. Without identifying the offender, determining why the killings apparently ceased remains impossible. The uncertainty fed public imagination. Was the killer living quietly somewhere nearby? Did he watch television coverage of the excavation? Did he recognize every victim's name as reporters announced them? Did he revisit the desert after police left, standing behind the crime scene tape as investigators unknowingly searched for the very man observing them? Such images appeared repeatedly in documentaries and news coverage. They remain speculation. No evidence places an unidentified offender at the excavation site after the discovery. Yet the psychological possibility continued haunting both investigators and families alike. Because history has shown that some serial offenders closely follow investigations into their own crimes. Whether that occurred in the West Mesa case remains unknown. By the end of the first year following the discovery, detectives had assembled thousands of pages of reports. Hundreds of interviews, dozens of forensic examinations, countless hours of fieldwork. The investigation had grown into one of the most complex homicide inquiries New Mexico had ever undertaken. And still, the central question remained unanswered. Who knew this desert well enough to trust it with 12 bodies? Who understood the city's hidden corners well enough to find vulnerable women again and again? Who walked away year after year, believing the wind would erase every trace? The files continued to grow. The evidence rooms continued to fill. The desert, however, offered no new answers. It had surrendered its dead. It refused to surrender the man who put them there. By the second year of the investigation, detectives had reached a difficult realization. The burial ground had revealed nearly everything it was ever going to reveal. Every square foot of desert had been photographed, measured, excavated, and searched again. Forensic teams had sifted the soil with painstaking care. Anthropologists had cataloged every fragment of bone. Crime scene technicians had documented every possible detail before the landscape was returned to silence. The evidence recovered from West Mesa had become finite. From that point forward, progress would depend almost entirely on people. Someone had to remember. Someone had to talk. Someone had to make a connection that had remained invisible for years. The Albuquerque Police Department established a dedicated investigative effort, working alongside state and federal partners where appropriate. Detectives reviewed not only the evidence collected after the discovery, but also every available missing person report connected to the victims. Old notebooks were reopened. Retired investigators were contacted. Archived interviews were replayed. Telephone records that once seemed insignificant were examined again through an entirely different lens. A question that had never appeared important in 2002 suddenly carried enormous weight in 2009. Who had been the last confirmed person to see a victim alive? Unfortunately, certainty proved elusive. Many disappearances occurred within communities where witnesses often used nicknames rather than legal names. Memories had faded over time. Some individuals who had once provided information could no longer be located. Others had died. Several struggled to recall exact dates after so many years. The investigation was, in many ways, racing against time. Not because the victims had only recently disappeared, because the living witnesses were slowly disappearing too. Each passing year weakened memories. Each passing year increased the likelihood that someone holding an important piece of information would never have another opportunity to share it. Detectives began reconstructing the social environments surrounding each victim with extraordinary detail. Which motels did they visit? Which convenience stores? Which intersections? Who regularly spent time there? Did the same unfamiliar vehicle appear repeatedly? Did anyone remember a customer who seemed unusually calm? Unusually polite? Unusually persistent? The smallest observation might prove invaluable. A recurring first name, a partial license plate, a distinctive tattoo, a habit, a phrase, something, anything. Thousands of investigative hours produced fragments. But fragments are not the same as proof. Some witnesses described men driving older pickup trucks. Others recalled sedans. A few mentioned individuals who seemed interested in women working the streets, but rarely spoke to anyone else. Years later, detectives could not reliably determine whether those descriptions referred to one person, several people, or ordinary customers who happened to be remembered. This uncertainty became one of the investigation's greatest obstacles. Patterns can emerge naturally. They can also emerge because people desperately want them to. Experienced homicide investigators constantly guard against confirmation bias, the tendency to interpret unrelated facts as evidence supporting an existing theory. The West Mesa case demanded exactly that discipline. Every possible lead required careful testing. Not hopeful assumptions. Verified evidence. During the same period, technological advances offered cautious optimism. DNA science continued improving across the United States. Laboratories developed more sensitive analytical techniques, capable of extracting genetic material from increasingly degraded samples. Cold cases once considered impossible suddenly found new life through modern forensic methods. Families naturally wondered whether those same breakthroughs might finally identify the West Mesa killer. Investigators shared that hope. At the same time, they understood the limitations. Advanced DNA analysis can only examine evidence that actually exists. If the necessary biological material was never deposited, or had deteriorated beyond recovery, technology alone could not create evidence where none remained. The burial site had spent years exposed to extreme environmental conditions. Heat, cold, wind, rain, animals, time itself. Nature had become an unintentional accomplice. Even so, forensic specialists preserved every item that might benefit from future scientific advances. Cold case investigations often depend upon patience. Evidence impossible to analyze today may become invaluable tomorrow. The investigation therefore remained active, even during periods when public attention declined. Behind closed doors, detectives continued evaluating persons of interest. Some names repeatedly surfaced during interviews. Others emerged through anonymous tips. One individual attracted particular attention because of his documented history involving violence against women and because he had lived in Albuquerque during the period when several victims disappeared. Investigators examined his background carefully. His movements, his criminal history, his known associates. Searches connected to him were conducted. Publicly available information indicates that investigators considered him a significant person of interest for a period of time. However, no publicly disclosed evidence has established that he was responsible for the West Mesa murders. Like several others before him, suspicion alone proved insufficient. The investigation moved forward. Another name. Another theory. Another dead end. This cycle repeated with frustrating regularity. Each promising lead generated hope among grieving families. Each failed lead deepened the uncertainty. For relatives, the emotional toll became almost impossible to describe. Some had already endured years believing their loved ones were simply missing. Then came the discovery in the desert. Hope gave way to grief. Grief gave way to another form of waiting. Not waiting for a return, waiting for justice. Many families attended community events together, united by circumstances none had chosen. Some spoke publicly about their daughters and sisters, determined that the women would not be remembered solely because of how they died. They described birthdays, favorite songs, childhood memories, moments of kindness, dreams interrupted long before the murders occurred. Those stories challenged a narrative that had quietly surrounded the case from the beginning. Too often, public discussions focused almost exclusively on addiction or sex work. Families insisted there was much more to remember. They were right. No life can be reduced to its hardest chapter. Investigators recognized another important reality. The offender, whoever he was, may have specifically selected women whose disappearances he believed would receive less immediate attention. If so, that decision reflected calculation rather than chance. Serial predators frequently seek victims they perceive as vulnerable. Not because vulnerability defines those individuals, because vulnerability lowers the offender's perceived risk. The distinction matters. Responsibility always rests with the killer, never with the victim. As investigators refined their geographic analysis, they revisited the routes connecting Central Avenue to West Mesa. Traffic studies, travel times, road conditions from the early 2000s, construction records, satellite imagery. The objective was simple: understand how the offender may have moved. Behavioral geography has become an increasingly valuable investigative tool. Criminals, like everyone else, develop comfort zones. They tend to operate within areas they know, while avoiding locations carrying unfamiliar risks. If detectives could estimate the offender's comfort zone, they might narrow the field of possible suspects. The West Mesa burial site complicated that effort. It sat close enough to Albuquerque for convenient access, yet isolated enough to discourage casual visitors. From an investigative standpoint, it represented a nearly ideal concealment location during the years before development expanded westward. Did the offender live nearby? Work nearby? Commute through the area? Or simply know it from years of outdoor activity? The available evidence did not answer those questions. Still, geographic profiling suggested that the burial location itself likely held personal significance for the offender. Whether practical or psychological remained unknown. Outside New Mexico, criminologists and journalists began comparing West Mesa with other unsolved homicide clusters involving marginalized women. Most comparisons centered on victimology rather than evidence. The women often shared similar life circumstances. The investigations frequently struggled with delayed reporting, limited witnesses, and deteriorated forensic evidence. Those similarities reflected recurring investigative challenges across North America. They did not establish that one offender committed multiple series of crimes. Detectives consistently emphasized that distinction. Facts first, connections later, only if evidence supported them. Meanwhile, tips continued arriving from across the country. Some callers claimed former acquaintances had confessed while intoxicated. Others insisted they recognized one of the victims from years earlier in another state. Several reported suspicious conversations they had never previously considered important. Every tip entered the system. Every credible lead received follow-up. The overwhelming majority produced nothing verifiable. Cold case investigations often generate an avalanche of information after major media coverage. Separating genuine evidence from coincidence becomes an investigation unto itself. As years passed, the case slowly transitioned from an active breaking news story into one of America's enduring unsolved homicide investigations. Television crews left. Headlines became less frequent. Public attention shifted toward newer tragedies. For the detectives assigned to West Mesa, however, the calendar meant very little. The files remained open. The unanswered questions remained exactly where they had always been. So did the victims. Not beneath the desert anymore, but inside evidence boxes, photographs, laboratory reports, interview transcripts, maps marked with circles and arrows that still pointed toward a man whose name nobody could write. Every unsolved homicide develops its own atmosphere. Some investigations feel one witness away from resolution. Others feel buried beneath decades of missing pieces. West Mesa carried elements of both. The possibility of breakthrough remained alive. Yet every month without new evidence quietly favored the unknown offender. If he was still alive, he had already accomplished something few serial killers ever achieve. He had vanished without ever being publicly identified. And somewhere beyond the growing neighborhoods that now overlooked the once empty mesa, the wind continued moving across the desert exactly as it had before the first grave was. Ever dug, as though the land itself had accepted that some secrets are surrendered only one fragment at a time, while the most important one continues to remain just beyond reach. As the investigation entered another year, the focus gradually shifted away from the burial ground and toward the lives that intersected with it. Detectives knew that graves do not create themselves. Someone had transported every victim. Someone had driven across the city, carrying a body without attracting attention. Someone had returned to the same isolated stretch of desert again and again, convinced that the silence would last forever. Understanding that person's routine became more important than understanding the graves themselves. Investigators began looking beyond individual suspects and instead examined categories of people who might naturally move through the victim's world without appearing unusual. Delivery drivers, maintenance workers, construction crews, traveling laborers, night shift employees, taxi operators, private motorists. Anyone whose presence on Albuquerque's streets after midnight would seem completely ordinary. This approach was not based on evidence pointing toward a specific occupation. It reflected criminal opportunity. A predator who regularly worked nights would possess advantages unavailable to someone following a typical daytime schedule. He would understand when traffic slowed. He would know which businesses remained open, where police patrols commonly parked, and how long it took to drive from Central Avenue to the Western Desert. Routine creates familiarity. Familiarity reduces hesitation. And hesitation is often what prevents a criminal from acting. The victim's disappearances also suggested another disturbing possibility. The offender may have developed a method that minimized confrontation. Investigators publicly disclosed very little regarding the probable sequence of the crimes, largely because so much physical evidence had disappeared before the remains were discovered. Yet behavioral analysts considered whether the killer relied more on deception than force during the initial contact. Someone offering a ride, someone promising money, someone pretending to be a customer, someone who appeared calm enough that climbing into his vehicle did not immediately trigger alarm. History has shown that many serial predators depend less on violence at first contact than on persuasion. Trust, even temporary trust, can become the deadliest weapon. Along Central Avenue, countless vehicles stopped every night. Most drivers had no criminal intentions. Some were simply passing through. Others sought conversation. Others conducted business that, while illegal in some circumstances, ended peacefully. For the women working those streets, quickly judging strangers became part of survival. Yet no one judges perfectly every time. A predator needs only one mistake. Investigators interviewed individuals who had spent years in those neighborhoods. Many described an unwritten awareness that certain customers felt dangerous. Women sometimes warned each other about aggressive drivers or unusual behavior. Nicknames circulated. Vehicle descriptions were shared whenever possible. But information spread informally. There was no centralized record. No database documenting every suspicious encounter. Years later, memories overlapped without always agreeing. Some recalled a man who never negotiated prices. Others remembered someone unusually quiet. A few mentioned customers who insisted on driving to remote locations. Whether those recollections described one individual or several different men could not be established. The uncertainty haunted investigators. A recurring description might represent the offender, or it might represent coincidence amplified by hindsight. That distinction mattered enormously. Meanwhile, detectives continued examining older criminal investigations involving violence against women in Albuquerque. Assaults, attempted kidnappings, and unsolved homicides were reviewed for similarities that might previously have gone unnoticed. Patterns occasionally appeared, then dissolved under closer examination. A suspect connected to one case had an airtight alibi for another. DNA excluded someone once considered highly suspicious. Witness statements contradicted one another. The deeper investigators searched, the more they appreciated how dangerous assumptions could become. Every serial homicide investigation carries a temptation to connect cases that share superficial similarities. Professional investigators resist that temptation unless supported by evidence. The West Mesa case demanded extraordinary restraint. One incorrect connection could divert months of investigative effort. One overlooked detail could delay justice indefinitely. During this period, advancements in digital record management proved helpful in ways unavailable during the early 2000s. Older reports that had once existed only in paper files could now be compared more efficiently. Detectives searched for recurring names, addresses, vehicles, and telephone numbers across multiple investigations. Technology accelerated comparison. It did not guarantee answers. A database can reveal patterns. It cannot explain them. Among the most difficult questions remained one that no computer could solve. Why had the killings apparently ended? Behavioral experts debated several possibilities. One theory suggested the offender experienced a major life change. Relocation, illness, military deployment, imprisonment for an unrelated crime, death. Another possibility held that the murders had not ended at all, that later victims simply had not yet been connected through available evidence. Neither explanation could be confirmed. Without identifying the offender, investigators had no reliable way to reconstruct his life after the final known disappearance associated with West Mesa. The passage of time complicated everything. Businesses changed ownership. Motels were renovated or demolished. Employees retired. Witnesses moved away. Surveillance systems that today routinely preserve digital recordings for investigative use were far less common during the years when the victims disappeared. Even where cameras existed, recordings were typically erased after short periods. By the time detectives recognized a potential serial pattern, those images had long vanished. The city itself had changed. New neighborhoods spread westward. Roads expanded. Vacant lots became housing developments. Places where victims were last seen no longer looked the same. The landscape preserved almost no visible reminders of what had occurred. Families, however, remembered every detail. Birthdays remained painful. Holidays left empty chairs. Children grew up without mothers. Parents aged while waiting for arrests that never came. For them, the investigation did not exist inside evidence lockers. It existed every morning they woke up. Several advocacy organizations began emphasizing an issue that extended far beyond one case: the need to improve responses to missing persons from marginalized communities. The argument was straightforward. Every disappearance deserves urgency. Regardless of occupation, regardless of addiction, regardless of housing status, regardless of public perception, law enforcement agencies across the United States have increasingly recognized the importance of addressing such cases with consistency, while also acknowledging that investigative resources and available evidence differ from case to case. The West Mesa investigation became part of that broader national conversation. Not because it offered easy solutions, because it demonstrated the cost of unanswered disappearances accumulating over time. Detectives also revisited anonymous tips received immediately after the discovery of the graves. Sometimes information dismissed during the chaos of a major investigation gains new significance years later. One caller remembered a suspicious conversation. Another described unusual nighttime activity near the Mesa years earlier. Some tips contradicted established timelines. Others could never be independently verified. Investigators pursued every lead that appeared remotely credible. Most quietly reached dead ends. Yet experienced homicide detectives understand that cold cases rarely advance through dramatic revelations. Progress often arrives through tiny corrections. One date adjusted. One address confirmed. One witness finally willing to speak. The challenge lies in recognizing which seemingly minor detail changes the entire picture. Behavioral profilers, meanwhile, continued refining their assessment of the unknown offender. Based solely on publicly available investigative information, they could not determine his age with confidence, his occupation, or whether he acted alone. However, repeated use of the same burial area suggested familiarity and organization. Successfully avoiding detection over several years implied patience rather than impulsiveness. Selecting vulnerable victims indicated calculated risk management rather than random violence. Those observations describe behavior, not identity. Many different individuals could theoretically fit such a profile. That reality frustrated both investigators and the public. People naturally seek certainty. Cold cases rarely provide it. Media coverage periodically reignited national attention. Documentary programs revisited the investigation. Journalists interviewed detectives, forensic experts, and surviving family members. Each anniversary prompted renewed headlines, asking the same haunting question. Who was the West Mesa bone collector? The nickname itself carried enormous psychological weight. Investigators did not know whether one offender committed every murder represented by the burial ground. Nevertheless, the term became permanently associated with the case in public memory. Sometimes names shape investigations. They simplify complex tragedies into recognizable narratives. Yet behind every headline remained 12 individual victims whose lives could never be reduced to a single phrase. As forensic science continued evolving, investigators preserved optimism that future techniques might unlock evidence previously beyond scientific reach. Across the country, cold cases from the 1970s and 1980s had begun reaching resolutions through new DNA technologies and improved genealogical methods. Those successes inspired hope. At the same time, detectives remained careful not to promise breakthroughs unsupported by existing evidence. Genetic genealogy has solved many cases. It has also encountered situations where usable DNA simply does not exist. Whether the West Mesa investigation will ultimately benefit from future forensic advances remains an open question. The evidence continues to be evaluated as technology develops. The possibility remains alive. So does the uncertainty. Late each evening, after news cameras departed and office lights dimmed across Albuquerque, the investigation continued in quieter ways. Detectives reviewed transcripts once more. Families reread old letters. Evidence technicians safeguarded boxes that might one day contain the answer everyone had spent years searching for. Somewhere inside those pages, photographs, laboratory reports, or forgotten interviews could be the single overlooked detail that finally exposes the person responsible. Or perhaps the answer has never entered the case file at all. Perhaps it still exists only in the memory of someone who witnessed an ordinary moment years ago and never realized its importance. A driver slowing beside the curb. A familiar face behind a windshield. A car disappearing west as the city lights faded into darkness. An ordinary memory. Until 12 graves transformed it into something else entirely. Every cold case eventually reaches a point where investigators stop asking only what happened and begin asking something far more unsettling. What didn't we see? That question echoed through every meeting room connected to the West Mesa investigation. Not because detectives lacked commitment. Not because the evidence had been ignored after the graves were discovered. But because the passage of time had exposed an uncomfortable truth. If a serial offender had indeed operated in Albuquerque over multiple years, then somewhere along the way, he had crossed paths with hundreds, perhaps thousands, of ordinary people. He bought gasoline. He stopped at convenience stores. He waited at traffic lights. He may have spoken with motel clerks, cashiers, mechanics, restaurant employees, and police officers without attracting the slightest suspicion. The greatest mystery was not how he buried his victims. It was how completely he blended into everyday life. Behavioral analysts often emphasize that serial offenders are rarely monsters in the cinematic sense. Most do not walk through the world announcing themselves. Many appear unremarkable, predictable, routine. They understand that invisibility is their greatest protection. Nothing in the publicly available evidence suggests the West Mesa offender deliberately sought media attention or attempted to build a public identity around his crimes. If anything, the opposite appeared true. The killer, or killers, should future evidence ever suggest more than one offender, left almost nothing behind except the victims themselves. That silence became one of the investigation's defining characteristics. No authenticated communications. No verified trophies publicly connected to the case. No confirmed attempts to contact grieving families. No known effort to manipulate investigators through letters or telephone calls. The murders, as far as investigators could determine, appeared committed for purposes that remain unknown. Without a living suspect, motive became extraordinarily difficult to establish. Control? Violence? Opportunity? Personal grievance? Sexual motivation? Some combination of several factors? Publicly available evidence has never answered those questions conclusively. Investigators therefore concentrated on what could actually be measured. Time. Distance. Movement. Routine. Maps covered conference tables once again. Detectives marked the last confirmed sightings of every identified victim. Colored lines stretched toward the western edge of Albuquerque. Some routes overlapped. Others diverged before converging near the desert. Traffic analysts reconstructed driving times using road conditions from the early 2000s rather than modern infrastructure. Construction records became unexpectedly valuable. Road improvements completed after the disappearances might dramatically alter travel patterns. Investigators wanted the city exactly as the offender would have known it, not the city that existed years later. They studied aerial photographs captured before new neighborhoods expanded across West Mesa. Vacant land dominated the landscape. Dirt roads snaked through open desert. Utility easements crossed otherwise empty terrain. At night, the area would have appeared almost limitless. One vehicle could disappear into darkness within minutes. Behavioral geography suggested another possibility. Offenders frequently establish what criminologists call a comfort zone, a geographic area where they understand escape routes, terrain, and daily activity. They rarely commit serious crimes in places completely unfamiliar to them, nor do they usually operate directly beside their own homes. Instead, they often choose locations somewhere in between. Comfortable, accessible, yet psychologically separate from their personal lives. Could West Mesa represent exactly that kind of location? It remained impossible to know with certainty. Still, detectives believe the burial site almost certainly reflected familiarity rather than random chance. The question became whether that familiarity originated from residence, employment, recreation, or something else entirely. Investigators also re-examined the timing of each disappearance. Were particular days of the week overrepresented? Did victims vanish during holidays, paydays, major community events, weather patterns? Even seemingly insignificant details sometimes reveal hidden routines. If an offender consistently worked weekdays, perhaps murders occurred on weekends. If he traveled professionally, perhaps disappearances aligned with periods when he returned to Albuquerque. The available timelines, however, resisted simple interpretation. Several victims disappeared under circumstances too uncertain to establish exact dates. The absence of precision complicated every statistical analysis. Cold case investigations often suffer from incomplete chronology. Without knowing precisely when a crime occurred, reconstructing an offender's schedule becomes dramatically more difficult. Meanwhile, forensic specialists revisited evidence stored since the original excavation. Scientific techniques had advanced once again. Improved imaging technologies allowed closer examination of skeletal trauma. Digital record-keeping simplified comparisons with national databases. Researchers continuously refined methods capable of identifying previously unknown human remains. Although investigators never publicly announced a breakthrough identifying the killer, every advancement represented another opportunity. Evidence preserved today may answer questions tomorrow. That philosophy has transformed numerous cold cases across the United States. The West Mesa investigation remained among those waiting for science to catch up with mystery. Outside official investigations, independent researchers and journalists continued exploring possible connections. Some focused on similarities between West Mesa and other unsolved murders involving vulnerable women. Others attempted to identify recurring suspects whose names appeared in multiple investigations. Professional detectives approached such comparisons carefully. Similarity alone proves very little. Many crimes share common characteristics. True investigative connections require evidence, not intuition, not coincidence, not internet speculation. The distinction became increasingly important as online discussions expanded. Forums devoted to unsolved crimes generated thousands of posts analyzing maps, timelines, photographs, and witness accounts. Amateur investigators occasionally uncovered useful historical information. More often, however, unsupported theories spread faster than verified facts. Families sometimes found themselves reading accusations against people who had never been charged with any crime. Investigators repeatedly reminded the public that every credible lead would be examined. Public rumor, however, could not replace forensic evidence. Among the recurring themes discussed both publicly and privately was the vulnerability of women living on the margins of society. The victims did not disappear because they deserved less protection. They disappeared because someone may have believed they would receive less immediate attention. That distinction shaped the investigation from beginning to end. Advocates worked closely with families to ensure the women would be remembered as individuals rather than stereotypes. Photographs displayed smiling faces. Family gatherings, children, graduations, birthdays, ordinary moments interrupted by extraordinary violence. Those images challenged simplistic narratives. They reminded the public that every victim carried an entire lifetime before becoming a headline. Investigators likewise emphasized victim-centered approaches whenever possible. Understanding the women's daily routines could illuminate offender behavior. Where did they usually stand? Whom did they trust? Which vehicles seemed familiar? Who had earned enough confidence to avoid immediate suspicion? Such questions required empathy as much as investigative skill. The answers rarely emerged from laboratory reports alone. They emerged from conversations with people whose memories had survived long after physical evidence disappeared. Some interviews lasted hours. Others unfolded across multiple meetings. Trauma affects memory in complicated ways. Families often remembered emotional moments with startling clarity while struggling to reconstruct exact dates. Friends recalled conversations, but not locations. Witnesses hesitated, uncertain whether a detail truly belonged to the relevant day or another occasion years earlier. Detectives learned to assemble truth from overlapping fragments rather than perfect recollections. Piece by piece, statement by statement, without forcing conclusions unsupported by facts. As the years passed, another difficult reality emerged. Potential witnesses themselves aged. Health declined. People relocated. Telephone numbers changed. Some individuals central to the victims' lives died before investigators could ask every question they wished to ask. Time was no longer merely an obstacle. It had become an active participant in the case. Every month removed another opportunity. Every year erased another memory. Yet time also worked in unexpected ways. Relationships changed. Loyalties faded. Secrets became harder to carry. Across criminal investigations, witnesses who once feared speaking sometimes reconsidered decades later. Former associates drift apart. Consciences evolve. One forgotten conversation suddenly acquires new meaning after years of reflection. Cold cases have been solved because someone finally decided they could no longer remain silent. Detectives hoped West Mesa might one day follow that path. Hope, however, could not substitute for evidence. Nor could determination guarantee success. The unknown offender had already demonstrated remarkable patience. If he remained alive, he had lived for years knowing that investigators possessed no definitive way to identify him publicly. That possibility weighed heavily on everyone connected to the investigation. Because somewhere in Albuquerque, or perhaps far beyond New Mexico, an ordinary man might have watched documentaries about the West Mesa bone collector without anyone realizing he was observing the story of his own crimes. Perhaps he sat quietly in a living room. Perhaps he discussed the case with coworkers. Perhaps he denied involvement while nobody around him imagined asking the question. Or perhaps investigators had been pursuing the wrong path entirely, and the truth remained hidden inside a detail so ordinary that no one had yet recognized its importance. The file stayed open. The evidence remained preserved. The desert had surrendered 12 victims. Everything else still belonged to the silence. The longer the West Mesa investigation continued without an arrest, the more the case transformed from a traditional homicide investigation into something much harder to define. It became a battle against time itself. In the beginning, detectives had the urgency of a fresh discovery. The graves had just been uncovered. The public was watching. Media attention was intense. Tapes flooded in. Every possibility seemed alive. But as months became years, the investigation entered the most difficult stage faced by any cold case team. The stage where answers do not arrive quickly. The stage where every lead must be measured against the reality that evidence disappears, memories fade, and people move on. Yet for the families of the victims, moving on was never an option. They carried the investigation with them. Every anniversary reopened old wounds. Every news report brought back the same unanswered questions. Who killed them? Why them? Why has nobody been held responsible? The discovery at West Mesa had solved one painful mystery. The women were no longer missing, but it created another. Who had taken them? And how had that person managed to disappear? Investigators understood that identifying the victims was only the beginning. The next challenge was reconstructing the final moments of their lives. That process required detectives to travel backward through years of uncertainty. They examined friendships, relationships, financial struggles, daily routines, places where the women spent time, people they trusted, people they feared. Every detail mattered because serial offenders often hide within ordinary interactions. The final person seen with a victim may not always be the killer. But the last known moments before disappearance often provide the narrowest window into what happened. Unfortunately, many of those windows had already closed. Some witnesses remembered only fragments. A conversation, a vehicle, a street corner, a person standing nearby. Details that seemed meaningless at the time. Years later, they carried enormous importance. But memory is not a recording. It changes. It reconstructs. It fills gaps. Investigators had to separate genuine recollection from details unintentionally altered by time. The challenge became even greater because many witnesses lived complicated lives of their own. Some struggled with addiction. Some experienced homelessness. Some moved frequently. Some feared speaking with police because of past experiences or legal concerns. Building trust became as important as collecting information. Detectives could not simply ask questions. They had to understand the environment in which those questions existed. The streets where the victims disappeared operated under their own rules. People protected themselves. Information was shared carefully. Suspicion was common. Many individuals had learned that cooperation with authorities did not always feel safe. Investigators needed people to believe that their voices mattered. Because somewhere among those voices could be the one person who remembered something that changed everything. A vehicle parked where it shouldn't have been. A stranger asking unusual questions. A man who appeared repeatedly in the same area. A confession made years earlier and dismissed as meaningless. Cold cases often survive because someone knows something. The challenge is discovering who that person is. As the investigation expanded, detectives also examined whether the killer had left behind patterns beyond Albuquerque. The idea of a predator using America's highway system to move between communities remained a disturbing possibility. The United States is connected by thousands of miles of interstate roads. Every day, millions of people travel those routes anonymously. A person can leave one city in the morning and arrive hundreds of miles away before nightfall. For investigators studying serial crime, highways represent both opportunity and difficulty. Opportunity because movement creates anonymity. Difficulty because jurisdiction creates barriers. A missing person report filed in one county may never immediately connect to another disappearance in another state. Different agencies maintain different files. Different investigators follow different theories. Different communities may never realize they share a similar tragedy. The West Mesa case renewed discussions about how law enforcement agencies identify possible links between crimes across large geographic areas. National databases had improved over the years, but no system could eliminate every gap. Especially when victims disappeared before investigators recognized a pattern. The first victim rarely reveals a serial offender. The second may appear unrelated. The third may still be explained away. Only later, When the pattern becomes visible, do investigators understand what they were looking at? By then, years may have passed. That possibility remained one of the most haunting aspects of West Mesa. How long had the offender operated before anyone knew? And how many opportunities existed to stop him? Those questions were impossible to answer without knowing the identity of the killer. Investigators reviewed the timeline repeatedly. The known disappearances, the estimated burial periods, the last confirmed movements. They searched for a moment when the offender's behavior changed. Did he become more careful? Did something interrupt him? Did someone discover information that forced him to stop? Behavioral experts often study what they call an offender's criminal career. Not every serial offender follows the same path. Some escalate. Some become reckless. Some stop abruptly. Some are caught through unrelated mistakes. The West Mesa offender, if one person was responsible, seemed to have avoided every common pathway to identification. There was no known arrest, no public confession, no confirmed witness, no forensic connection, only the graves. The lack of a clear motive created another layer of uncertainty. In many homicide cases, investigators begin with motive. Money, jealousy, revenge, conflict, personal relationships. But serial murders often operate differently. The victim and offender may have no previous relationship. The motive may exist entirely within the offender's psychology. That makes traditional investigative methods far more difficult. There may be no angry messages, no financial trail, no obvious personal connection. The crime itself becomes the connection. For families, that reality was devastating. They wanted to know why. Even the most painful explanation can sometimes provide a form of closure. But the West Mesa case offered no explanation, only absence. Meanwhile, investigators continued receiving occasional tips from people claiming to have information about the case. Some came forward because they genuinely believed they knew something. Others were driven by speculation. Each required careful evaluation. A credible tip must contain details that can be independently verified. A name alone is not enough. A suspicion is not evidence. An accusation is not proof. This distinction became increasingly important as the case gained attention online. The internet created new opportunities for information sharing. It also created new dangers. False claims could spread instantly. Innocent people could become targets of suspicion. Families could experience additional pain as strangers debated theories without understanding the full investigation. Authorities repeatedly emphasized that solving the case required facts, not rumors. That message reflected the central reality of homicide investigations. The truth is often hidden beneath layers of uncertainty. Finding it requires patience. By this point, the West Mesa bone collector investigation had become one of New Mexico's most recognized cold cases. The phrase itself carried weight. It represented unanswered questions, lost lives, and a community still waiting. But behind the name was something more human. 12 women whose stories began long before the desert. Women who had families. Women who had friends. Women who had moments of happiness and struggle. Women whose final chapter was written by someone else. The killer may have chosen the location. The killer may have chosen the time. But the victims' lives did not begin or end with the crime. That message became increasingly important as years passed. Because unsolved cases can sometimes allow the offender's identity to overshadow the victims. The mystery becomes famous. The victims become forgotten. Families fought against that. They continued sharing photographs. They continued telling stories. They continued reminding the public that behind every forensic report was a human being. And while the investigation continued quietly, another question remained impossible to ignore. If the person responsible was still alive, what had he done with all those years? Had he built a normal life? Had he changed his appearance? Had he moved away? Had he committed other crimes that investigators had not yet connected? Or had he been closer than anyone imagined all along? Those possibilities kept detectives searching, because cold cases are not truly closed when the headlines disappear. They remain alive in evidence rooms, in family memories, in unanswered phone calls, in the quiet determination of investigators who refuse to accept that silence is the final answer. The West Mesa Desert had waited years before revealing what was buried beneath it. Now another question remained buried somewhere else. Not in the ground, but in the memory of the person who knew the truth. And until that person speaks, the case remains exactly where it began, waiting in the darkness. Years after the first discovery at West Mesa, the landscape continued to change. The empty desert that once appeared endless slowly became surrounded by signs of expansion. Roads grew busier. New homes appeared. The sounds of construction replaced the silence that had once covered the area. To most people passing through, it became another developing part of Albuquerque. But for investigators and families, the land remained something else entirely. A place where 12 lives were lost. A place where one of America's most haunting, unsolved homicide investigations began. The physical landscape changed. The mystery did not. Inside police archives, the case remained frozen in time. Thousands of pages documented interviews, forensic examinations, photographs, maps, and investigative theories. Every document represented an attempt to transform uncertainty into evidence. But the central question remained untouched. Who was responsible? Cold cases often survive because they contain one missing piece. A single witness. A hidden document. A forgotten conversation. A piece of biological evidence. One detail capable of connecting everything together. The West Mesa investigation appeared to be waiting for exactly that. Detectives knew that somewhere, someone might possess information they did not realize was important. A neighbor who saw unusual activity. A friend who heard a disturbing confession. A person who recognized a vehicle years after first hearing about the case. The difficulty was that people rarely understand the importance of a memory until they know the outcome. A strange conversation in 2003 might have seemed meaningless. A suspicious comment from a coworker might have been dismissed. A person acting unusually after a disappearance might have appeared irrelevant. Only after the graves were discovered did those moments gain a different meaning. That is one of the defining challenges of cold case investigations. Investigators are not simply searching for facts. They are searching for facts that existed before anyone knew they mattered. As detectives reviewed the case, they continued examining the possibility that the offender had a personal connection to the burial location. The choice of West Mesa remained one of the most discussed aspects of the investigation. Why that place? Why return there repeatedly? Why risk using the same area? Criminal behavior experts often examine offender decisions because locations can reveal hidden patterns. A random dumping site suggests one type of behavior. A carefully selected burial location suggests another. The West Mesa graves indicated planning. The victims were not abandoned in an obvious location. They were concealed. The offender appeared to believe the desert would protect his secret. For several years, that belief proved correct. Until one afternoon when a dog uncovered what the killer had hidden. The discovery itself was almost accidental. There was no major search operation underway. No anonymous confession. No dramatic police breakthrough. Just a chance encounter between a person, an animal, and a piece of ground that had kept its secret for years. That detail became one of the most haunting elements of the case. The truth was always there. It was simply invisible. Investigators understood that the same principle might apply to the killer. Perhaps the answer had always existed within the case. A name mentioned in an interview. A timeline overlooked. A connection nobody recognized. The challenge was finding it. Over the years, law enforcement agencies reviewed advances in forensic science with cautious optimism. DNA technology continued transforming criminal investigations across the world. Cases once considered impossible were reopened. Evidence collected decades earlier produced genetic profiles. Unknown suspects were identified. Families finally received answers after generations of waiting. Those breakthroughs created hope for West Mesa. But DNA has limitations. It requires usable genetic material. It requires evidence preserved well enough to analyze. It requires a connection between the sample and a known person. Science can reveal answers. It cannot manufacture them. Investigators continued preserving available evidence, aware that future technologies might succeed where current methods could not. The history of criminal investigation has repeatedly shown that impossible cases can become solvable when technology evolves. A fingerprint once considered useless. A photograph once considered unclear. A biological sample once considered too damaged. Time changes what science can accomplish. For families, that possibility represented a fragile form of hope. Not certainty. Hope. The years following the discovery also brought renewed attention to missing and murdered women across North America. Advocates highlighted how many victims from vulnerable communities remained unidentified or overlooked. The West Mesa case became part of a larger discussion about how society responds when missing individuals do not fit traditional images of victims. Many families argued that the circumstances surrounding a person's life should never determine the urgency of finding them. A missing person is still missing. A victim is still a victim. That message became central to the legacy of the investigation. Because the West Mesa women were often described through the struggles they faced. But their families remembered different things. A daughter's laugh. A sister's personality. A mother's love. A friend's loyalty. The details that never appeared in police reports. Those memories mattered because they restored individuality to people whose identities had been reduced by headlines. Meanwhile, detectives continued examining possible connections between West Mesa and other unsolved cases. The idea of a highway-connected serial offender remained one of the most discussed theories among the public. America's transportation network creates unique investigative challenges. A person can travel hundreds of miles while remaining almost completely anonymous. A vehicle provides mobility. Distance provides separation. Different jurisdictions provide additional barriers. But investigators understood that theories must be supported by evidence. A person traveling on highways is not automatically connected to multiple crimes. A similar victim profile does not automatically prove one offender. The investigation required discipline, not imagination. Every potential connection had to survive scrutiny. Could the same person have been involved? Was there evidence linking locations? Did timelines align? Were methods consistent? Without those answers, connections remain possibilities rather than conclusions. That careful approach sometimes frustrated the public. People wanted a single explanation, a single villain, a single moment when everything became clear. Real investigations rarely unfold that way. They move through uncertainty. They advance slowly. They eliminate possibilities one by one. And sometimes, despite years of work, they still end with unanswered questions. For the investigators assigned to West Mesa, that reality was difficult. Police officers entered the profession believing that justice can be achieved. But some cases challenge that belief. They test patience. They test determination. They force investigators to continue searching even when success seems distant. The West Mesa case became one of those investigations. The absence of an arrest did not mean the work stopped. Cold case detectives continued reviewing information as new resources became available. New personnel examined old files. Fresh eyes looked at evidence collected years earlier. Sometimes a different investigator notices something that previous teams overlooked. Not because earlier detectives failed, because every investigator brings a different perspective, a different question, a different way of seeing the same evidence. That possibility kept the investigation alive. The same files that had frustrated detectives for years could still contain the answer. Perhaps hidden in a statement. Perhaps inside a timeline. Perhaps in a connection between two people whose names appeared in separate documents. The mystery remained open. And as the years continued, another disturbing possibility remained. The person responsible may have lived an ordinary life after the crimes. Serial offenders who avoid detection often do not appear constantly suspicious. They work. They socialize. They create relationships. They age. They become part of the communities around them. The idea was unsettling because it meant the killer may not have been hiding in the shadows. He may have been living among everyone else. A neighbor. A coworker. Someone seen every day. Someone nobody questioned. Of course, without an identified offender, such possibilities remain speculation. But they explain why unsolved serial cases create such lasting fear. The unknown is often more frightening than the known. A convicted criminal can be placed behind bars. A missing identity cannot. The West Mesa Bone Collector remained a name without a face. A crime without a final chapter. A question that continued echoing across the desert. As another anniversary approached, the families returned to the same painful reality. Their loved ones had been found, but justice had not. The desert had finally spoken. The investigation had listened. Yet somewhere between those two moments, the truth remained trapped, waiting for someone to reveal it, waiting for one final piece, waiting for the silence to break. In the years that followed the discovery at West Mesa, the investigation entered a stage familiar to many of America's most difficult cold cases. The stage where the world moves forward, but the questions remain. New crimes replaced old headlines. New investigations demanded attention. The public's focus shifted. But inside the files of the West Mesa Bone Collector investigation, nothing truly changed. 12 victims. One desert. Countless unanswered questions. For detectives, the passage of time created both obstacles and opportunities. Every year that passed meant fewer witnesses with clear memories. Fewer records preserved exactly as they once existed. Fewer people available to explain what happened during the years when the victims disappeared. But time also had another effect. It changed people. And sometimes, change creates the one thing cold cases need most. A reason to speak. People who once stayed silent because of fear, loyalty, shame, or uncertainty sometimes reconsider their decisions years later. Relationships end. Secrets become heavier. Old guilt becomes impossible to ignore. A person who once believed a detail was meaningless may eventually realize it was the missing piece investigators were searching for. That possibility remained one of the strongest sources of hope surrounding West Mesa. Because while physical evidence had limitations, human memory was still capable of producing breakthroughs. The investigation continued to depend on someone remembering something. Something small. Something ordinary. Something that had seemed irrelevant years earlier. A conversation. A vehicle. A name. A location. A moment. Cold cases are often solved not by discovering something completely new, but by finally understanding something that was already there. Investigators repeatedly return to the timeline of disappearances. They search for similarities, not just between the victims, but between the circumstances surrounding their final days. Where were they last seen? Who was nearby? What opportunities existed for contact? What places allowed someone to approach without attracting attention? The answers repeatedly led back to the same challenge. The victims lived in environments where anonymity was common. The streets where they worked or spent time were full of movement. People arrived and left constantly. A stranger could appear for only a few minutes and vanish into the city. That environment provided cover. For a predator, it created opportunity. For investigators, it created uncertainty. A typical homicide investigation often begins with a small circle. Family, friends, co-workers, enemies, people connected to the victim. But serial predatory crimes are different. The victim may never have known the offender before the final encounter. The suspect pool expands from dozens of people to thousands. Every stranger becomes a possibility, and almost all of them are innocent. That is the impossible balance investigators must maintain, searching aggressively without losing sight of facts, following every lead without being consumed by speculation. The West Mesa investigation became an example of that challenge. The public wanted answers. Families demanded justice. Investigators wanted the same thing. But wanting an arrest and proving a case are two completely different realities. A prosecutor does not need a theory. A prosecutor needs evidence. Evidence strong enough to survive courtroom scrutiny. A suspect must be connected not only emotionally or logically, but legally. The person responsible must be tied to the crimes through facts. That standard protects justice. But it also means some killers remain unidentified longer than anyone wants. During this period, detectives also continued studying the possibility that the offender's behavior reflected familiarity with both the victim's environment and the burial location. Two worlds appeared connected. The busy streets of Albuquerque. The isolated desert of West Mesa. The distance between them was not large. But psychologically, it represented a dramatic transition. One environment was filled with people. The other was almost empty. One offered visibility. The other offered concealment. The offender appeared to understand both. That combination raised questions about his background. Did he live in Albuquerque long enough to understand where vulnerable women could be found? Did he know the desert because of work or personal activities? Was West Mesa chosen because it was convenient? Or because it held some private meaning? The answers remained unknown. Criminal profiling could suggest possibilities. It could not identify a person. That limitation became a constant reminder throughout the investigation. Behavior can reveal patterns, but behavior alone rarely reveals names. Meanwhile, public fascination with the case continued. Documentaries, podcasts, and investigative programs revisited the story. Each new production brought renewed attention. Each brought new viewers who had never heard of the victims before. For families, that attention carried both benefits and pain. More awareness meant more people knew their loved ones' names. But it also meant reopening memories of loss. The case remained emotionally complex. Every discussion of the investigation carried the weight of real grief. The media often focused on the mystery of the unknown offender. But families continued focusing on something different. The lives that existed before the murders. They wanted people to remember birthdays, personalities, dreams. Not only the circumstances of death. That distinction became increasingly important as years passed. Unsolved cases can sometimes transform victims into symbols. But symbols are not enough. They were real people. And the absence of justice affected real families every single day. Investigators understood that emotional reality. Many cold case detectives described their work as carrying unfinished stories. They inherit cases started by others. They review evidence collected before their involvement. They speak with families who have waited years. The responsibility is heavy, because behind every folder is someone who never received justice. The West Mesa investigation carried that weight. The women had waited years to be found. Their families had waited years to know. Now everyone was waiting for the final answer. During later reviews of the case, investigators continued examining whether technological advances might reveal new opportunities. Digital databases became more powerful. Historical records became easier to search. Forensic methods improved. Cold case units across the country demonstrated that time does not always favor criminals. Sometimes time gives investigators new tools. A case forgotten for decades can suddenly move forward because of one scientific advancement. That possibility remained alive for West Mesa. The evidence had not disappeared completely. The investigation had not been abandoned. The door remained open. But behind every hope was the same difficult reality. Technology cannot replace missing information. Science cannot reconstruct every lost moment. Some answers depend on people. The person who knows. The person who saw. The person who remembers. And that person may not even realize they hold the key. Perhaps someone once saw a vehicle leaving West Mesa late at night. Perhaps someone noticed a friend suddenly behaving differently. Perhaps someone heard a confession and dismissed it as impossible. Perhaps someone has carried a secret for years. Investigators understood that many cold cases are solved when someone finally decides to speak. The question was whether that moment would come for West Mesa. Another theory frequently discussed by investigators and experts involved the possibility that the offender had previous or later crimes not yet connected to him. This possibility naturally concerned law enforcement. A person capable of multiple murders may have a broader history. However, no publicly confirmed evidence has conclusively linked the West Mesa killings to additional cases. The investigation remains centered on the victims recovered from the desert. Still, the possibility encouraged continued comparison with missing person cases throughout the region. Every unidentified victim represented another question. Every unresolved disappearance represented another possibility. The work continued. Quietly. Methodically. Without the dramatic moments often shown in television dramas. Real investigations rarely end with a single confession under bright interrogation room lights. More often, they advance through patience. One interview. One record. One scientific result. One person deciding to tell the truth. That was the reality of West Mesa. A case built not around a lack of effort, but around a lack of answers. The offender had left behind a scene that spoke only in fragments. The victims had been recovered. The story had been uncovered. But the final identity remained hidden. And perhaps the most unsettling thought remained the simplest. Somewhere, someone knew. Someone knew who drove into the desert. Someone knew who returned. Someone knew who left those graves behind. The desert had already revealed its secret. Now investigators were waiting for the person who carried the last one. The West Mesa Bone Collector investigation became a case defined by absence. The absence of a suspect. The absence of a confession. The absence of a final explanation. But perhaps the most painful absence was the one felt by the families who had spent years waiting for justice that never arrived. For them, time did not soften the loss. It only changed the shape of it. The first years were filled with frantic searching. Then came the devastating discovery. Then came the long silence. The silence after a tragedy can sometimes be harder than the tragedy itself. Because a murder investigation, no matter how painful, carries movement. Detectives make arrests. Evidence is presented. A courtroom creates a final confrontation between the accused and the truth. But an unsolved case leaves families trapped in uncertainty. There is no final moment. No explanation. No person held accountable. Only questions. Who was he? Was he someone the victims knew? Did he live nearby? Did he drive past the investigation scene while police searched the desert? Did he follow news reports and realize that his secret had finally been discovered? Those questions remained impossible to answer, and that uncertainty became part of the case's enduring power. The West Mesa investigation captured public attention because it represented a fear many people struggle to explain. The possibility that someone capable of extraordinary violence could exist among ordinary society. Someone who could appear normal. Someone who could interact with others every day while hiding a terrible secret. History has shown that some serial offenders successfully maintain ordinary appearances for years. They work regular jobs. They maintain relationships. They participate in communities. They are not always the obvious person standing at the edge of society. Sometimes they are invisible precisely because they appear ordinary. That possibility forced investigators to consider a difficult question. What if the person they were searching for had never looked like a monster? What if he looked like everyone else? The investigation continued examining potential suspects, but public speculation often moved faster than evidence. Names appeared online. Theories spread. Individuals became targets of suspicion based on rumors rather than facts. Investigators repeatedly emphasized that solving a homicide requires more than identifying someone who seems suspicious. A case must be built on evidence. A person's background. A personality. A strange coincidence. None of those alone proves guilt. The West Mesa investigation required patience because the cost of being wrong was enormous. For innocent people. For victims' families. For the integrity of the investigation itself. Behind every theory was a human life. That reality complicated public discussion. People wanted answers. But answers created without proof could create another form of injustice. Detectives continued reviewing information gathered since the beginning. They examined original reports. They compared witness statements. They analyzed timelines. They revisited locations. Cold case investigators often describe this process as looking at a familiar photograph with new eyes. The image has not changed. The observer has. Years of experience can reveal details that were invisible before. A sentence in an old interview may suddenly seem important. A name mentioned briefly may require another look. A timeline once considered insignificant may reveal a pattern. This was the hope surrounding West Mesa. Not that the answer had magically appeared, but that the existing evidence might still contain something overlooked. The investigation also continued benefiting from the growing cooperation between agencies. Modern law enforcement relies increasingly on information sharing. A disappearance no longer exists only inside one city's records. National databases, digital archives, and improved communication allow investigators to compare information across broader regions. That progress matters in cases involving possible traveling offenders. But even the most advanced systems have limitations. A database can connect information. It cannot create information that was never recorded. Many disappearances from the early 2000s occurred before today's technology became standard. Digital footprints were smaller. Surveillance was limited. Social media was still developing. Cell phone data was far less comprehensive. The world in which the crimes occurred was different. And every missing piece from that period created another obstacle. Investigators also continued considering whether the offender might have changed his behavior after the graves were discovered. If he was responsible, the discovery would have represented a major disruption. A secret location was exposed. Law enforcement attention increased. Media coverage intensified. The risk of continuing became much higher. Some experts believe such pressure can cause offenders to stop. Others suggest they may adapt and become more cautious. Without identifying the perpetrator, nobody knows which explanation applies. The possibility that the killer simply stopped remained one of the most haunting aspects of the case. Because stopping does not necessarily mean innocence. A person can stop because circumstances change, because fear increases, because opportunity disappears, because something else happens in life, or because the offender dies before being discovered. Every possibility leaves the same unanswered question. What happened after West Mesa? The victims represented one known chapter, but the unknown chapters surrounding the case remained open. Another challenge involved the passage of time itself. The people who could potentially provide answers were aging. Some witnesses had moved away. Some had changed their lives completely. Some may no longer remember details they once considered important. Others may have carried memories they never shared. Cold case investigators understand that time creates a complicated relationship with truth. It destroys evidence, but it can also reveal it. A person who was afraid 20 years ago may no longer feel the same fear today. Someone protecting another person may eventually decide loyalty has expired. Someone carrying guilt may finally seek relief. Many historic cases have been solved because silence eventually became unbearable. The West Mesa investigation remained dependent on that possibility. One voice, one decision, one moment of honesty. The community of Albuquerque continued living with the shadow of the case. For residents who remembered the original discovery, West Mesa became more than a location. It became a symbol, a reminder of lives lost, a reminder that some questions remain even after enormous investigative effort. Yet the case also produced important conversations about awareness, victim advocacy, and the importance of taking every missing person report seriously. The victim stories encourage communities to recognize warning signs earlier, to listen more carefully, to understand that every missing person leaves behind someone who cares. The legacy of West Mesa was therefore not only the mystery of an unidentified offender. It was also the reminder that the victims mattered before they became part of a cold case. Their lives had value before the investigation began. Their names mattered before the headlines. Their families deserved answers from the moment they disappeared. As years passed, the phrase West Mesa Bone Collector remained attached to the case. It became a title repeated in documentaries and news reports. But behind that title was a much more complicated reality. There was no confirmed identity, no confirmed motive, no public explanation, only a series of crimes that changed countless lives. The desert had once hidden the evidence. Now time itself seemed to be hiding the truth. But investigators knew one thing. Cold cases are never truly finished. They may become quieter. They may leave the front pages. They may wait years between developments. But they remain alive. Evidence remains stored. Files remain accessible. Questions remain unanswered. And sometimes, after decades of silence, a single discovery changes everything. A new forensic technique, a forgotten witness, a confession, a piece of evidence finally understood. The possibility remains. For the families, that possibility is what keeps hope alive. For investigators, it is what keeps the case open. And for the person responsible, if he is still alive, it represents something else entirely. A threat that has never disappeared. Because every cold case carries the same message. Time does not erase the truth. It only delays the moment when the truth is finally found. And somewhere beyond the streets of Albuquerque, beyond the highways that connect cities, and beyond the desert where 12 women were discovered, the final answer remains hidden. Waiting. Waiting for the evidence. Waiting for the witness. Waiting for the person who knows exactly what happened in West Mesa to finally step forward.